the worst part wasn't the sound. It was the sound stopping. It was the moment that guttural, inhuman, clicking sound. The one that had been echoing from the canyons suddenly stopped and was replaced by something else entirely. Something familiar, an imitation of my wife's voice, clear as day, calling my name from the darkness. It wasn't perfect, it was just enough to freeze the blood in my veins. The cadence was wrong, the tone was just a shade too high, but the terror was in the intent. It knew my name, and it wanted me to think it was her. My name is Marc, and I'm a geologist. Or I was. I'm a man of science, of rocks and strata, of predictable forces and measurable data. I spent my summers doing fieldwork in the vast, silent stretches of the American Southwest, specifically a remote, desolate region bordering the Navajo Nation. It's a beautiful place, deep red canyons, mesas that catch fire at sunrise, and an endless, humbling sky. I always respected the land, the isolation, and the stories that came with it. I'd heard the hushed conversations about the things that walk at night, the ancient warnings. I always filed them away as fascinating folklore, the colorful mythology of a resilient culture. I was a practical man. I believed in what I could see and touch. That was my baseline, my safe and solid ground, and that's what made the ground open up beneath me. It started subtly, as these things always do. My first clue should have been the stillness, not the absence of sound, but the wrongness of it. One afternoon, I was hiking back to my truck, navigating a series of dusty arroyos, when I came across a dead coyote. Now, seeing a carcass isn't unusual out there, but the way this one was arranged was, it was splayed out, limbs bent at impossible angles, as if something had tried to turn it inside out. Its face was frozen in a silent scream, and there were no obvious puncture wounds, no signs of a struggle. Just this profound, disturbing stillness. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, but I dismissed it as the heat in my imagination. The next day, the sounds began, faint at first, like the wind playing tricks, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper on the breeze, a series of quick footsteps that sounded like they were pacing my own, just out of sight, behind a rocky outcrop. I'd stop and listen, but the moment I did, everything would fall silent, just the hum of the heat and the distant call of a hawk. My rational mind attributed it to echoes, to the unique acoustics of the canyons. The sun baked everything, and my mind was probably playing tricks on me. But the tricks grew more personal. I started seeing things in my periphery, a shadow, long and thin, that would dart behind a boulder the second I turned my head, a flash of movement on a distant ridge that didn't belong to a big-horned sheep. I started camping closer to my truck, just in case. The paranoia became a steady hum beneath my thoughts. Then came the scratching. One night, a few days into my trip, I was lying in my tent, half asleep, when I heard it. A faint, deliberate scraping sound on the outside of my tent flap. My heart hammered. I froze, holding my breath. It wasn't the sound of an animal looking for food. This was a patient, rhythmic drag of something sharp against the nylon. Slowly, I reached for my flashlight. The scratching stopped the moment I grabbed it. My fingers fumbled with the switch, and I shot the beam out the side of the tent. Nothing, just the vast, empty night. I scanned the area, but the light only illuminated dust and scrub brush. The moment I turned it off, the scratching returned, this time on the opposite side of the tent, a lower, more guttural sound that seemed to be digging into the earth itself, right where my head was. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my sleeping bag, listening to the sounds of something circling me, waiting. It was no longer the wilderness I knew. It was something else, something with purpose, something that was toying with me. The last morning I was there, I woke up with the sun. Exhausted and shaken, I packed up my gear, my hands trembling. I was done. I was going home. I got in my truck, turned the key, and nothing happened. The engine cranked, but it wouldn't catch. My breath hitched in my throat. I popped the hood and saw that a key electrical wire had been cleanly, expertly snipped. I don't carry wire cutters. I don't know who would. As I stood there, a cold wave of dread washed over me. I wasn't just being watched. I was being held. I looked up at the surrounding mesas, and that's when I heard it. The clicks and whistles, the impossible bending of my own name on the wind. A sound that was too complex to be human, and yet it was there. And then it stopped, and the imitation of my wife's voice started. I didn't try to fix the truck. I just got back in and locked the doors. The feeling of utter, profound helplessness consuming me. I didn't know what to do, how to survive the coming night. I just knew I was bait, and the line had just gone taut, as twilight bled into a black, star-strewn night. I saw it. It didn't walk. It shambled, a long, unnaturally thin silhouette, moving over the rocky terrain with a jerky, almost broken grace. It was impossibly tall, and its limbs seemed to bend the wrong way. I couldn't make out a face in the dim light of the moon, only the glint of what might have been eyes. It was getting closer. The guttural clicking returned, a rapid, wet sound that was now punctuated with distorted, garbled echoes of my own voice, of my wife's, of the sounds I'd been hearing all week. It reached the truck and stopped, a few feet from my driver's side window. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then, it leaned forward. It placed a long, clawed hand on the glass, just inches from my face. I could see the vague shape of a palm, but the fingers were too long, too spindly, ending in black, razor-sharp talons. I saw the faint, sickly yellow glow of its eyes through the shroud of darkness that was its face. The terror was a physical force, pinning me to the seat. I fumbled for my keys in a blind panic, my hand shaking so violently I dropped them. I picked them up, shoved the key into the ignition, and with a desperate guttural cry, I twisted it. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, lurching forward, not daring to look back in the rearview mirror. I drove blindly, headlights cutting a swath through the night, until I saw the blessed lonely lights of a gas station on the highway. I never went back. I sold my truck, quit my job. I couldn't bear to be alone in the dark anymore. Couldn't stand the sound of a distant dog barking or a crow cawing without wondering if it was just an imitation. The memory of that thing, the way it moved, the way it knew my name, is a heavy, suffocating weight I'll carry forever. I'm safe now, in a city full of people, but I know it's out there, somewhere, in the empty places, and every so often, when the wind blows just right, I think I can hear my name on the breeze. Just a little too high, just a little too wrong. It didn't just imitate, it replaced. The thing that came back to the ranch that night, walking on two legs like my father. It wore his clothes and made his sounds, but it wasn't him. The truth was, I wasn't even sure where the real him was anymore. The real horror of what happened to my family isn't the moment I came face to face with the thing, but the slow, agonizing realization that for days, maybe even weeks, I had been living with a monster wearing the face of the man who raised me. The deep, gnawing dread was the fact that it took me so long to notice. Our family ranch was an isolated place, nestled deep in the arid, rolling hills of Utah, miles from the nearest paved road. My name is Liam. I grew up with my parents, Sarah and Bill, on that land, a life of hard work, long days, and the comforting predictability of the seasons. We were a close-knit unit, relying on each other for everything. The sounds of our home were a part of the family. My dad's hearty laugh after a long day, the low, steady murmur of my mother's humming as she worked in the kitchen, the familiar mewling of Old Man Tom, our ancient one-eyed barn cat. The world was vast and empty beyond our fences. but inside, it was warm and safe. It was this baseline of normalcy, this foundation of trust and familiarity, that made the cracks so subtle at first, and the eventual collapse so complete and devastating. The first hint of something being wrong was with old man Tom. He had been with us for so long he was practically a member of the family, a grizzled old tomcat with a single, knowing eye. One evening, he didn't come back from his evening patrol. My mom was upset, but we figured it was just a circle of life. The coyotes were always hungry. A few days later, a cat that looked exactly like him was sitting on the porch. The same matted gray fur, the same one-eyed stare, the same curled tail. He looked identical, but he wasn't. He was quiet, terribly, unsettlingly quiet. He never meowed, never purred. When you petted him, he would just sit there, a silent, unmoving statue, his good eye watching you with a chilling stillness that made my skin crawl. He'd follow me from room to room, not for a treat or a scratch, but just to watch. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, but it was there, and it was deeply, fundamentally wrong. After the cat, the animals started acting up. Our herd of cattle, usually placid and predictable, became skittish. They would stampede for no reason, huddling together against the fences as if a predator were on the prowl. But there was never anything there. Then, one night, the air was torn by the bellow of our prize bull. A sound of such profound and visceral distress it felt like the earth itself was crying out in pain. My father, Bill, grabbed his rifle and rushed out. He was gone for a long time. When he finally came back, he was pale, his hands shaking slightly. "Just a coyote spooking them," he said, his voice a little too flat. "All's good now," but everything wasn't good. The bellowing was the first time the thing had truly exposed its hand, and it would not be the last. Slowly, insidiously, my father started to change. It began with little things. He would answer a question a second too late, as if the words were being translated in his mind. He'd forget things he knew by heart, like the combination to the feed shed lock. His laugh, the one I had known all my life, was now an empty, hollow sound, a mimicry that had the cadence, but none of the genuine warmth. His eyes, the kind, crinkling eyes of a man who loved his family and his land, became vacant, lifeless. My mother started to notice it too. I'd catch her looking at him with a worried, questioning expression, a look that said, "Who is this man?" We never spoke about it though. The thought was too terrifying to put into words. The unraveling came on a moonless night. I was working on my truck, and my dad was supposed to be checking on the fences on the north end of the property. My mom was inside. Suddenly, I heard her voice, panicked and terrified, calling out for my father from the deep shadows of the northern field. "Bill, where are you? Bill, please." My heart leaped into my throat. I ran in that direction, screaming her name. "Mom, where are you?" I called out, my voice strained with fear. Then, the voice came again, but this time, it was from the south. The sound was distorted, as if coming from a broken speaker, and it was mocking, "Bill, Bill." The sound was perfect in its imitation, a flawless copy of my mother's terror, but the location was impossible. That's when the memory of the bull hit me, the bellowing that was not just a sound of distress, but a performance of it. The realization crashed into me with the force of a physical blow. The thing that came back with my father's face was not him. My real parents were gone. One of the things was now in the house, and another was out there. Toying with me, I ran back to the house, but as I reached the door, it opened. The silhouette of my father stood there, a shadow in the doorway. "Liam, what's wrong?" it said, in a voice that was perfectly, chillingly his. I slammed the door shut and bolted from my room, locking the door and barricading it with the old dresser. I could hear it outside, the padding of its feet, the slow, deliberate turning of the doorknob. Then it began to speak, its voice a low, soothing plea. "Liam, son, What's going on? Come out. We're worried about you. It was the voice of a loving father, a perfect, agonizing imitation. Then the voice changed, dropping into a deep, guttural growl. Its words a threat. Don't you want to see your mother again, Liam? At the same time, I heard a frantic tapping sound at the window. I turned and saw the one-eyed cat staring in, its eye glowing with a malevolent, sickly yellow light. Its mouth was open, and a low, guttural, chittering sound. The sound that had begun to haunt my thoughts was coming from deep within its chest. I realized then that they were everywhere. They had me surrounded. With a primal scream of terror, I grabbed a chair, smashed the window, and scrambled out into the night, the shattered glass falling to the ground like a death knell. I didn't stop running. I never looked back. I ran blindly through the dark, the sounds of my family's voices, the twisted, mocking echoes, following me on the wind. I didn't stop until I reached the highway and the lone, welcome lights of my nearest neighbor's house, miles away. They found me there, a broken, terrified wreck. The ranch was investigated, but nothing was ever found, just an empty house and the silence. The mystery remains unsolved. I never found out what happened to my parents. The ranch is an empty shell, a monument to a perfect replacement. I live in a different state now, in a city with millions of people, but I still jump at shadows. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I hear a faint, distant meow, and I wonder if it's truly just a stray cat, or if the thing with one eye is still out there, waiting for me to be alone again. The woods are full of sounds, and I've learned to read every one. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, a distant bird call. They all tell a story. They tell you what's near, what's far, what's hiding, and what's moving. But the sounds I heard that night, the ones I've been hearing ever since, they don't tell a story. They tell a lie. They are a weapon wielded by something ancient and patient. Something that hunts with the voices of its victims. Something that knows the wilderness better than any man. My name is Ben, and for 15 years, I was a park ranger in one of the most remote national parks in the country. I was a man who found solace in the deep woods, a man who believed in a natural order. I've dealt with everything from lost hikers and rogue bears to forest fires and flash floods. I was a professional. A skeptic who trusted his training and his gut. I never believed in the ghost stories told around campfires or the whispers about ancient curses. The mountain I patrolled was a wild and beautiful place, but it was just that, a mountain. And the mysterious disappearances that had been plaguing the park for a few years, I wrote them off as tragic accidents, the inevitable price of underestimating the wilderness. I figured the hikers were getting lost, falling, or succumbing to the elements. They were unprepared, and the park was a powerful teacher. But I was about to learn that the park itself was not the teacher. It was a hunting ground, and there was a master predator at work. The first clue was a campsite. I was on a solo patrol deep in the backcountry when I came across it. It was completely abandoned, but not in the way a campsite is left when people pack up and leave. The gear was all there. A half-burned log in the fire pit, 2 backpacks leaning against a tree, a can of beans still sitting on a portable stove, but the tent was shredded, ripped open from the inside, as if something had burst through the fabric in a blind panic. And then there were the tracks. Around the tent, I found a series of prints that sent a shiver down my spine. They were large, almost human in shape, but with a pronounced heel pad and long, clawed toes. They were also spaced unnaturally far apart, suggesting a powerful loping stride. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a mountain lion. It was something else. My radio crackled to life with a garbled report of a missing couple, last seen in this area. A cold certainty settled in my gut. They hadn't gotten lost. They had been taken. After that, the sounds began. It started with a low, mournful wail, a sound I initially dismissed as the wind. But then I heard it more clearly. The sound of a baby crying. It was coming from a rocky gorge, a few hundred yards away. The sound a mix of heart-wrenching distress and a strange, synthetic quality, like a distorted recording. I was a trained rescuer. I had to investigate. I scrambled down into the gorge, calling out, but the crying stopped the moment I entered. All I found was silence. A few days later, while on a different patrol, I heard a woman's scream, a high-pitched, desperate sound that seemed to echo from the next ridge over. Again, I went running, my heart pounding with adrenaline, but when I got to the top of the ridge, the sound was gone. I spent the next few weeks chasing these ghosts, the cries of a baby, the panicked calls for help, the desperate screams of a woman. They always led me deeper into the woods, just a little farther, just a little more isolated, before vanishing without a trace. My rational mind was trying to find an explanation, a prankster with a sound machine, an echo effect from the canyons, exhaustion playing tricks on my ears. But my gut, the part of me that had trusted the wilderness my entire life, was telling me a different story. Then, the lies became more personal. My patrol partner Dave was one of my closest friends. We'd worked together for years. We had our own little jokes, our own shorthand. One evening, as I was sitting by my campfire outside my remote ranger cabin, I heard a voice call out from the woods, "Ben, hey, Ben." It was Dave. The voice was so perfect, so spot on, I instinctively stood up, ready to greet him. But then the voice continued, "Ben, help me, Ben." The urgency was right, but the words were wrong. Dave would never have called out to me like that. He would have used our code, a specific sequence of whistles, to let me know he was there. This was a panicked, desperate lure. My blood ran cold as I realized what I had been doing for weeks. The crying baby, the screaming woman, they weren't just sounds. They were bait. Lures designed to make me, a trained professional, break protocol and abandon my position. I was a man of the woods, and something in the woods had learned how to hunt me. It had learned to use the very things that made me a rescuer against me, preying on my need to help, on my humanity. I spent the rest of that night in a state of profound, bone-deep terror. I was back at my cabin, the only semblance of safety I had, but I knew I was far from safe. The sun began to set, casting long, menacing shadows across the clearings, and the sounds began again. But this time, they weren't distant. They were all around me. The baby's cry, the woman's scream, the distorted call of my partner's voice. They were a cacophony, a swirling symphony of horror coming from the trees surrounding the cabin. I was a man under siege. The sounds were so real, so terrifyingly close, that I had to cover my ears, trembling uncontrollably. Then, all the sounds stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying, and I heard it. A new sound, the crunch of heavy, deliberate footsteps. They were walking on two legs, but the gait was wrong. A loping, unnatural rhythm that was too low to the ground. The footsteps stopped right outside my cabin door. I froze. I slowly, shakily, moved to the small window on the side of the cabin and peered out. Standing there, just feet from my door, was a tall, thin silhouette. It was impossibly thin, covered in matted, dark fur that was almost black in the low light. Its head was bent at a strange, unnatural angle. I knew then that it wasn't a bear or a coyote. It was the thing that left those tracks. I watched in paralyzed horror as it slowly turned its head, and I saw two glowing, sickly yellow eyes staring directly at me through the window. Then, a single sound, a low, guttural growl, a perfect parody of a human sound of profound hatred, came from outside my door. It was a sound that told me I had been found. I managed to scramble into a small, reinforced supply closet, barricading the door and waiting out the night in a state of sheer, unadulterated terror. The next morning, A search party found me, a shell-shocked wreck, babbling incoherently. I never went back to the park. I quit my job and moved to a small town far from the mountains. I can't bring myself to listen to bird calls or distant screams anymore without wondering if they're real, or if they're just another one of the lies, the lure of a patient predator. I escaped, but the knowledge that something ancient and malevolent is out there, hunting with the sounds of the things you love, is a burden I will carry for the rest of my life. The first time I saw the boy, he was standing at the end of the long hallway in my grandmother's house in rural Vermont. I had been sent there for the summer, a restless 16-year-old from Boston, exiled to the quiet, ancient clapboard house with its creaking floors and the scent of dust and potpourri. My grandmother, a kind woman with a face like a roadmap of forgotten decades, told me the house had been in our family for over a century. I remember looking at her and thinking about how much history was packed into those walls. How many people had walked these same floorboards? It was a beautiful place, a big old farmhouse surrounded by fields that rolled into thick woods. But there was a weight to it, an unspoken quiet that felt heavy, almost suffocating. That first night, as I lay in the guest room, the stillness of the countryside was a foreign language to my city-slicker ears. No sirens, no traffic, just the chirping of crickets and the groan of the old house settling. It was in that deep silence that I saw the boy. He wasn't solid, more like a wavering heat haze, but I could make out the shape of him. A small boy in what looked like turn-of-the-century clothes, a little suit with short pants. He was just standing there, unmoving, and then as I blinked, he was gone. The next morning, I chalked it up to being over. New house, new sounds, a strange dream. But over the next few days, the presence lingered. It was a feeling more than a sight. A chill that would sweep through a room for no reason, even on a hot August afternoon. The inexplicable feeling of being watched when I was alone in the library. Or a fleeting movement I'd catch in my peripheral vision in the upstairs hallway. My grandmother was oblivious, bustling about her day, humming to herself, and tending to her garden. I didn't want to worry her, so I kept it to myself. I spent my days exploring the woods behind the house, trying to outrun the feeling of unease that had taken root in my stomach. The woods were dense and beautiful, a place that felt as old as the house itself. There was a small, neglected cemetery on the edge of the property line, with a handful of weathered headstones from the late 1800s. I read the names, trying to imagine the lives they had lived, a few of them children who had died young. I remember finding one tiny stone with the name Thomas and a date from 1898. It was a simple grave, no more than a small moss-covered rock. It gave me a strange, profound sadness. The activity escalated. The faint, rhythmic tapping I'd heard on my first night returned, a soft, persistent thud against the wall beside my bed. It would start just after I turned off the light, slow and steady, like a small fist knocking from the other side. I moved my bed away from the wall, but the tapping followed. It wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from within the room. The first night this happened, I pulled the sheets over my head, heart hammering against my ribs, convinced it was just my imagination. The second night, I finally mustered the courage to sit up and listen. The sound seemed to be coming from the antique wardrobe in the corner. I crept over to it, my hands shaking as I reached for the brass handle. I pulled it open and saw nothing but old moth-teen coats and dusty blankets. The tapping immediately stopped. I slammed the door shut and scrambled back to bed, a cold sweat beating on my forehead. The following nights, the phenomena became bolder. I'd be reading a book in the living room, and a porcelain teacup would slide an inch across the mantelpiece. I'd come out of the bathroom to find a chair at the dining table pulled out, as if someone had just gotten up. The unsettling feeling of being watched was no longer a feeling. It was a certainty. I could feel eyes on my back, a breath of cold air on my neck. I started to talk to the empty spaces in the house, a low whisper of, "Leave me alone," or "What do you want?" The boy, the heat haze. I saw him more often now. He wasn't just in the hallway. I'd see him in the reflection of a window, standing just behind me, or a flash of his little suit disappearing around the corner. He never made a sound, never moved with any urgency. He just was, a quiet, persistent reminder that I was not alone. The fear was no longer a panicked flight response. It was a slow, creeping dread that permeated every moment of my day. Every corner of the old house. The climax of it all happened on a rainy Tuesday. The storm had knocked out the power, and the house was plunged into a heavy, oppressive darkness. My grandmother had gone to bed early, so I was alone downstairs, trying to read by the light of a single flickering candle. The silence, normally so unnerving, was now filled with the sound of the storm. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. I heard a sound from upstairs, a distinct and unmistakable thud. I froze, the book forgotten, in my lap. It wasn't a settling sound. It was the sound of a heavy object being dropped on the floor. It came from my grandmother's room, directly above me. I slowly stood, my body screaming at me not to go. But my grandmother was old, and I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed the candle and started up the stairs, the flame casting long, dancing shadows that made the banister look like a skeleton's fingers. The air grew colder with every step, and the scent of old dust was replaced by a cloying, earthy smell, like a fresh grave. When I reached the top, the hallway was a tunnel of blackness. I held the candle high and saw it. At the end of the hall, right outside my grandmother's bedroom door, was the boy. But this time he wasn't a haze. He was solid. His face was pale and dirt-streaked, his eyes were wide and black, and he was holding something, a small, rusty spade. He looked at me, a silent, hollow gaze, and then his mouth opened, a wide, unnatural circle, and from it came a sound that didn't belong to a human throat, a low guttural shriek that was part wind and part something else, something deeply ancient and wrong. The scream seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards, and the candle in my hand went out, plunging me into absolute darkness. I don't remember running down the stairs. I don't remember scrambling to the front door. The next thing I knew, I was on the porch, the rain soaking my clothes, gasping for air, as if I had been underwater for a week. I didn't go back into that house. Not that night, or ever again. My grandmother, confused and concerned, called my parents, who drove up in the middle of the night to get me. I tried to explain, but the words sounded like nonsense, even to my own ears. They just saw a scared, shivering boy, and a house that had simply lost power. My grandmother still lives there, and she says she doesn't believe in ghosts. But every time I talked to her on the phone, she mentioned the strangest things. An old teacup she finds moved on the mantel, or a chair she swears she didn't pull out. She tells me, with a nervous laugh, that she just must be getting old and forgetful. But I know the house isn't empty, and I know the boy is still there, still waiting, still playing his long, slow game in the silent, suffocating dark. Growing up in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, our lives revolved around the sun. Everything was bleached out and dry, the air so still and hot, it felt like a physical presence. The one escape we had from the suffocating summer heat was the basement. Our house was a 1970s ranch style, and the previous owner, a retired military man, had dug out a full basement as a kind of self-sufficient bomb shelter. It was an oddity in our neighborhood, where most houses were built on slabs. The entrance was a narrow, steep staircase off the kitchen, and it was always at least 20 degrees cooler down there. We used it for storage, a place to throw old Christmas decorations and boxes of my dad's forgotten books. But my brother, Marc, and I turned it into our own kingdom. We'd set up a rickety card table and a couple of beanbag chairs, a small TV with a VCR, and spend entire days down there. Escaping the brutal heat, the low drone of the central air conditioner, our constant soundtrack, we'd watch old horror movies and play card games. The air thick with the smell of damp concrete and something else, something musty and sour that we just attributed to old age. I remember one time, Marc jokingly called it the dead air room because the air felt so heavy, so still. The basement was our little haven, a place of peace and cool darkness, a sanctuary from the relentless Arizona sun. The first oddity was the radio. It was a cheap, battery-powered thing we used to listen to the Diamondbacks games. We'd leave it on the card table, and every so often, without anyone touching it, the station would switch. Not just a little staticky flicker, but a clean jump to a different channel, often a religious station or a country one. We'd joke about a ghost being a fan of old gospel hymns, but it was just a strange quirk. Then the TV started doing it. It wasn't connected to cable. We only used it for VHS tapes. But sometimes, when it was off, the screen would flicker to life with a blast of white noise. A blank, humming screen full of static. We'd flip the power switch, and it would go off, only to turn on again a few minutes later. Marc and I started a game, timing how long it would take for the ghost TV to turn itself on. The first time the VHS player ejected a tape on its own, a tape of The Exorcist no less, we started to get a little creeped out. It was no longer a quirky ghost. It was a presence that seemed to be actively engaging with our technology. We talked to our parents about it, but they were convinced we were just being dramatic. My dad went down and unplugged the TV and the radio, but that didn't stop the humming. Even with the power cut, a low, continuous static hum would sometimes fill the room. It was like the very air was charged with some kind of unseen energy. Then things started to get more personal. The hum became more frequent, and a faint whisper started to accompany it. I'd be sitting at the card table, reading a comic book, and hear my name called. So soft and low, it sounded like it was coming from inside my own head. Jess. It was never loud enough to pinpoint, never distinct enough to prove. It was just there, a spectral murmur. Marc heard it too. We started to get jumpy, glancing at the stairs, half expecting someone to come down and explain the weirdness away. The whispers evolved, becoming full sentences. Though still so quiet and distorted, it was hard to make them out. Get out. You're not welcome. They sounded like they were spoken in slow motion, drawn out and stretched thin. One evening, Marc and I were playing cards and the hum grew louder, filling the whole basement with a vibrating energy. The card table began to shake, just a subtle tremor at first. But then the cards on the table began to slide and fall off onto the concrete floor. Marc and I looked at each other, our eyes wide with a shared, unspoken fear. The whispers were no longer just whispers. They were a cacophony of distorted, overlapping voices, all speaking at once, unintelligible and enraged. The hum was so loud now, it was physically painful, a pressure in our ears. I remember Marc grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the stairs, his face pale and contorted with fear. As we ran, we heard something behind us. Not a voice, not a hum, but a sound like scraping, like something heavy being dragged across the concrete floor. We didn't look back. We didn't dare. The climax came the following week, after our parents insisted we were just imagining things and we needed to go back down to face our fears. We went reluctantly, armed with a flashlight and a heavy-duty camping lantern. The moment we stepped onto the bottom stair, the basement door at the top slammed shut behind us. We fumbled with the handle, but it wouldn't budge. We were trapped. The static hum was immediate and overwhelming, and the whispers were louder, clearer, and more malicious than ever. The light from the camping lantern flickered violently, casting long, dancing shadows. Suddenly, a figure materialized in the middle of the room, standing right in front of the TV. It wasn't a solid person, more like a flickering screen, a man made of pure static and white noise. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and I could just make out the dark, angry shapes of his eyes. His voice, a grating, electronic roar, filled the room. "I told you to get out," he bellowed. The air around him was cold and smelled like ozone. He raised a hand, and the card table we'd been playing on years earlier lifted into the air and was hurled across the room, smashing into a wall. The man made of static advanced on us, his form flickering and pulsing with an eerie internal light. Marc yelled and tried to push me toward a small window, our only other way out, but the static man was faster. He reached for Marc, and for a split second, I saw his hand. It wasn't a hand, but a claw, a black, jagged thing made of pure darkness. I don't know how we got out. I have a vague, disjointed memory of Marc smashing the glass of the window well with his elbow, and us scrambling out into the scorching Arizona sun. We ran to our neighbor's house, incoherent and terrified. My parents, after calming us down, went to inspect the basement. They found the card table shattered against the far wall, and a jagged black scorch mark on the concrete floor where the static man had stood. They never said anything about it again. My parents sold the house a month later. We never saw the man again, but the hum followed us. Sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I can still hear it, a faint low buzz that feels like a whisper. And every time I hear it, I'm reminded of the angry man made of static, a ghost who didn't want to haunt, but to live, and who was willing to do anything to get us out of his dead air room. I was a caretaker for old houses in rural upstate New York. I got the job through my uncle. He managed a handful of historical properties for a preservation society. Most of the time it was a quiet job, just keeping the pipes from freezing and making sure the squirrels hadn't found a new way into the attic. But one of the properties was different. It was an old Victorian, a massive, turreted thing on a hill overlooking the Hudson River. The owner, a reclusive artist named Silas, had left it to the society with the stipulation that it be maintained exactly as it was. I was tasked with being the sole caretaker. The house itself was a museum of a life. Every room was filled with Silas's creations, intricate clockwork automata, strange brass telescopes pointed at the ceiling, and paintings of unsettling, empty landscapes. The air was heavy with the smell of old wood, dust, and something else, something metallic and sharp like ozone. My job was just to be there, to keep the place from falling apart. I didn't mind the solitude. The quiet felt like a blank canvas. But as the winter nights grew long, I started to feel like the house wasn't just old. It was observing me. The first month was uneventful, but then I began to notice things. Small, impossible things. I'd be in the library, and a book I'd just placed on a shelf would be back on the desk, its pages open and ruffled. I'd come downstairs in the morning to find the antique parlor chairs arranged in a circle, as if they were holding a silent meeting. It was subtle, almost ghastly. I started to take photos of every room before I left it, just to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. The pictures were always the same, but the reality was not. My most unsettling discovery was with the grandfather clock in the main hall. It didn't work. The pendulum was still, the hands frozen at 12:03, but every night, I'd come out of my room and the clock would be ticking. Just for a moment, a low rhythmic tick-tock that would stop the second I focused on it. I'd approach it, put my ear to the glass, and nothing. Silence. But I knew what I had heard. The house felt like it was playing a long game, a slow, methodical test of my sanity. The presence wasn't hostile, not yet. It was more like an infestation of boredom, a mischievous, unknowable intelligence that found amusement in rearranging my world and making me question my own memories. The escalation was a slow, creeping dread. It began with the paintings. The landscapes, which I had initially found just unsettling, began to change. Small, imperceptible things at first, a new shadow on a distant hill, a faint shape in the sky. Then, one night, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In a painting of a barren field, a single, tiny figure had appeared. It was in the far distance, a stick-like shape with a disproportionately large head, staring out of the canvas and directly at me. I stood there, frozen in the hall, my flashlight beam trembling on the framed image. I felt my stomach clench with a deep, primal fear. From that night on, the figures in the paintings moved. I'd walk past a portrait of a stern-looking man and see his eyes follow me. I'd catch a glimpse of the stick figure in the corner of my eye, in a different painting, closer to the foreground. The house was no longer just rearranging furniture. It was actively changing the reality within its walls. I tried to cover them with blankets, but by morning, the blankets were on the floor, and the unsettling figures were there, watching me, moving closer. I stopped sleeping in my room and started to sleep on the sofa in the living room. A heavy axe I found in the shed propped up beside me. The ticking of the grandfather clock was constant now, a maddening rhythm that permeated the entire house, even when I couldn't consciously hear it. It was no longer a trick. It was the beat of the house's cold, malevolent heart. The climax arrived on a frigid night when the wind was so loud against the windows it sounded like a frantic whisper. I was in the living room, trying to force myself to read a book, the axe by my side, when I heard a distinct sound from the main hall. Not the ticking, but a deep, resonant hum, like a gear turning. I crept out of the living room, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, and saw it. The grandfather clock, which hadn't worked in decades, was in motion. The hands were spinning, not ticking, but a continuous, accelerating whir. The pendulum swung wildly, a blur of motion. The hum was deafening now, vibrating through the floorboards. I was about to turn and run when I heard a low, grating sound coming from the clock's face. The hands had stopped spinning and were now moving backward, slowly, deliberately. The minute hand moved to the 11, then the 10, then the 9. The clock wasn't just working, it was reversing time. The humming sound intensified, and the air around the clock began to shimmer, a thick, coiling haze. From within the haze, a shape began to form. It was a man, indistinct and wavering, like a mirage. But I could make out the sharp outline of his face, the dark pits of his eyes. He looked like the artist, Silas, but his face was contorted into a silent shriek of pure, agonizing rage. He was trapped in the clock, and he was staring at me, his mouth open, screaming a scream that had no sound, just a wave of pure psychic terror that hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air around me grew impossibly cold, and I felt the presence of 1,000 unseen eyes watching from the shadows, a silent audience to the man's suffering and my terror. I ran from that house, and I never went back. I left the job, and I didn't bother to explain why. I just called my uncle and told him I couldn't do it anymore. He didn't push. He just told me he had an idea that something like this might happen one day. I don't know what happened to the house. I don't know if it's still standing or if someone else is living in it. I don't know if they can still see the figures in the paintings or if they hear the unending tick-tock of the clock. But I know that somewhere in that old Victorian, a man is trapped, reliving a moment of pure, silent agony for all eternity, and the house itself is his warden, his jailer, and I know the house will never stop. It's too old to ever forget. The woods are a place of profound beauty, a sanctuary of ancient trees and quiet solitude, but they are also a place of profound, primordial terror. A place where a person's life is a small, fragile thing, and the things that live there are ancient, terrifying, and hungry. We, as campers, are drawn to the quiet of the wild, but we don't realize that some places aren't just empty. They are waiting. They are waiting for a new visitor to walk through their trails, to disturb the silence, and to become a part of a story that never truly ended. I've been on dozens of camping trips, but nothing prepared me for the echoing silence of Blackwood Forest. My friend Jake and I, both experienced campers, were there for a weekend trip. We had hiked 4 hours deep into a remote, secluded part of the woods that was known for its quiet solitude and its ancient, towering trees. We set up our camp, a small 2-person tent with a fire pit, and we settled in for a night of quiet solitude. But the silence was oppressive. It was a silence that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a heavy, physical weight. The air was thick with the scent of pine and decay, and the only sound was the low, rhythmic tapping of a stick on a tree, a sound that seemed to come from deep within the woods. We dismissed it as a woodpecker or a fallen branch, but the tapping was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It was a slow, methodical beat, and it seemed to be getting closer with every passing hour. My fear turned into a profound, suffocating sense of claustrophobia. The woods felt like they were closing in, and the tapping was no longer just a sound. It was a collective, a living, breathing, terrifying chorus of 100 silent voices. My paranoia built to a fever pitch. The tapping, which had once been a faint, distant sound, was now a constant, low drone that seemed to be coming from the woods themselves. The tapping was a ghost in my mind, a constant, maddening chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. I started to hear a new sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to be coming from the woods. It was a sound that was not of any animal I had ever heard, a sound that spoke of a profound, ancient terror. The growl and the tapping became a chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. The woods' walls seemed to be pulsing with a malevolent energy, a rhythmic beat that was the heartbeat of the woods itself. The shadows in the trees began to move on their own, to writhe and stretch into grotesque, human-like shapes. I felt a cold, physical touch on my arm, and I saw a fleeting reflection of an old-fashioned person in a puddle of water. A ghostly, terrified face that was gone as quickly as it appeared. The tapping and the growl were now a deafening, frantic shriek, a terrifying chorus of 1,000 tiny, desperate voices. The wood's walls began to move, its trees twisting and turning, its shadows flying through the air. The tapping and the growl are a deafening shriek, and I realize the woods are not a place of comfort. It is a place of despair, and the entity is here to feed on them. The final hour was a terrifying descent into madness. The tapping was a constant, deafening chorus. 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, a torrent of despair and anguish that was drowning out my own thoughts. The front door began to slam on its own, the sound a deafening, rhythmic beat that was a countdown to a climax I didn't want to be a part of. The shadows from the house began to coalesce into a single, massive, amorphous shape, a living, breathing entity of pure despair. The growl was a deafening shriek, and I realized the house is not a place of comfort. It is a place of despair, and the entity is here to feed on me, to consume my fear and my anguish, to make me a part of its eternal, horrifying cycle. The creature emerges from the woods, a tall, impossibly thin figure with long, spindly limbs. Its face is a terrifying collection of clicking mandibles, and its eyes are a burning, malevolent red. The creature begins to move toward us. Its movements are terrifying, silent, and fluid dance. I ran. I didn't stop until I was out of the woods, out in the cold, rainy night. I never looked back. The experience left me with a lasting, profound sense of trauma. The tapping on the window, a ghost in my own mind, is a constant companion. I can no longer be in the woods at night, and the sound of a simple tapping is enough to send a shiver of cold dread down my spine. The woods are still there, a massive brick structure that is a silent monument to a living evil. And I know, with a cold, lasting dread, that the despair is still there, waiting for its next visitor, a new person to become a part of the despair. We go to nature to escape, to shed the confines of our modern lives and find a quiet solitude. But what if nature has its own rules? What if the woods hold secrets that the human mind was never meant to comprehend? What if a secluded lake isn't just a body of water, but a place where time itself is unstable, a place where a single, isolated moment can become an eternity? I thought I was just on a solo camping trip, seeking a few days of peace. I didn't realize I was walking into a place with a story that was still being written, and I was about to become a permanent part of its chilling narrative. The lake was called Whisper Lake by the locals, a remote, secluded body of water tucked away in a dense forest. I had found it on an obscure hiking forum, lauded for its untouched beauty and profound quiet. On my way there, I stopped at a small, rusty gas station, the only sign of civilization for miles. The old man behind the counter, his face etched with a lifetime of sun and hard work, gave me a strange look when I mentioned my destination. "That's a quiet place," he said, his voice a low, raspy whisper. "Some folks say it's a ghost lake. They say people go there and come back, different, like they've seen too much of the past." I dismissed it as local folklore, the ramblings of an old man in a lonely place. The lake was beautiful, but the silence was oppressive, a heavy, suffocating stillness that felt less like peace and more like a profound, watchful waiting. I set up my camp on a small clearing on the shore, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The first few hours were peaceful, but as dusk settled in, the low, continuous hum began. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A low, rhythmic drone that was the sound of 1,000 crickets. But it was a single, unnatural tone that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the woods. I dismissed it as a natural sound, a chorus of insects, but the hum was too deliberate, too intentional. It was a constant, maddening melody that was a soundtrack to my burgeoning paranoia. I started to notice other things, subtle, temporal shifts that made my heart pound in my chest. I would be looking at the lake, and for a fleeting moment, I would see not my own reflection, but the reflection of a woman in an old-fashioned dress, her face contorted in a look of profound, heart-wrenching sadness. The image would vanish as quickly as it appeared, leaving me with a chilling certainty that I was not alone. My paranoia built to a fever pitch. The hum from the lake, which had once been a faint, distant sound, was now a constant, low drone that seemed to be coming from the woods themselves. The hum was a ghost in my mind, a constant, maddening chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. I started to have memories that weren't my own, snippets of conversations from decades ago, a deep, aching sadness that felt like it belonged to someone else. I discovered a hidden, old, forgotten campsite, a place with a rusted fire pit and a collection of old, handwritten notes and a journal from a previous camper. The journal entries described a similar experience, a descent into madness caused by the hum and the temporal shifts. The last entry was a single, terrifying sentence. "I think I've been here before." My fear turned into a profound sense of isolation. I was trapped at the lake with a collective, malevolent entity that was not just a ghost. It was a living, breathing thing that was a part of the lake's very structure. The final hour was a terrifying descent into madness. The hum was a constant, deafening chorus, 1,000 voices all speaking at once, a torrent of despair and anguish that was drowning out my own thoughts. The shadows in the trees seemed to move on their own, to writhe and stretch into grotesque, human-like shapes. I felt a cold, physical touch on my arm, and I saw a fleeting reflection of an old-fashioned person in a puddle of water, a ghostly, terrified face that was gone as quickly as it appeared. The hum was a deafening shriek, and I realized the lake is not a place of beauty. It is a place of despair, and the entity is here to feed on me, to consume my fear and my anguish, to make me a part of its eternal, horrifying cycle. The climax came in the dead of the night. I was standing on the shore, my heart pounding in my chest, and the temporal shifts became a full-blown event. The lake dissolved, and I found myself in the same space, but in a different era, with different people and different clothes. I was not an observer. I was a participant. The people in the room, a group of campers from a century ago, looked at me with a mixture of terror and familiarity, as if I were the ghost, and I had become a permanent, living part of the lake's haunting. The local gas station owner's words from the beginning, about the lake's history, came back in a new, horrifying light. The lake wasn't just a place where people disappeared. It was a place where they became a part of the past, a living, breathing ghost in a story that would never end. I ran. I didn't stop until I was out of the woods, out in the cold, rainy night. I never looked back. The experience left me with a lasting, profound sense of trauma. The hum of 1,000 crickets, a ghost in my own mind, is a constant companion. I can no longer be in an enclosed space without a profound sense of fear. The lake is still there, a massive stone structure that is a silent monument to a living evil, and I know, with a cold, lasting dread, that the despair is still there, waiting for its next visitor, a new person to become a part of the despair. Asterisk. We go to the woods to escape, to shed the confines of our modern lives, and find a quiet solitude. But what if the woods have a way of gaslighting a person? What if the trees, the rocks, the very ground, are all a part of a collective, malevolent entity that is waiting for a new person to fall into its trap? What if a forest isn't just a collection of trees, but a living, breathing thing that has a story to tell? A story that it wants to tell you. A story that you will never be able to forget. I thought I was just on a solo camping trip, seeking a few days of peace. I didn't realize I was walking into a story that was still being written, and I was about to become a permanent part of its chilling narrative. I had always loved the quiet solitude of the woods. This time, I had chosen a remote, secluded part of the forest, a place with a small, pristine stream and a large, inviting clearing for a campsite. The air was crisp, the scent of pine was intoxicating, and the only sound was the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. The forest was beautiful, but the silence was oppressive, a heavy, suffocating stillness that felt less like peace and more like a profound, watchful waiting. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the clearing, and I felt a profound sense of unease, a chilling certainty that I was not alone. I set up my camp, a small, one-person tent with a fire pit, and I settled in for a night of quiet solitude. But as dusk settled in, a new sound began, a low, rhythmic breathing, a sound that was not my own. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was the wind, or a hallucination, a trick of the mind. But the breathing was too rhythmic, too intentional. It had a strange, purposeful quality to it, a slow, methodical beat that was too unsettling to ignore. It would stop for a few minutes, and then resume again. A little closer, a little more insistent. My heart began to pound in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs. I got up from the couch and peered through the curtains, but the window was dark, the rain a constant, rhythmic beat against the glass. I saw nothing, but the air felt thick and heavy, and a profound, bone-chilling coldness emanated from the window. A cold that had nothing to do with the storm. My paranoia built to a fever pitch. The breathing, which had once been a faint, distant sound, was now a constant, low drone that seemed to be coming from the woods themselves. The breathing was a ghost in my mind, a constant, maddening chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. I started to hear a new sound, a low guttural growl that seemed to be coming from the woods just outside the house. It was a sound that was not of any animal I had ever heard, a sound that spoke of a profound, ancient terror. The growl and the tapping became a chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, all telling a terrifying, fragmented story of a life that was created and a life that was lost. The wood's walls seemed to be pulsing with a malevolent energy, a rhythmic beat that was the heartbeat of the woods itself. The shadows in the living room began to move on their own, to writhe and stretch into grotesque, human-like shapes. I felt a cold physical touch on my arm, and I saw a fleeting reflection of an old-fashioned person in a puddle of water, a ghostly, terrified face that was gone as quickly as it appeared. The breathing and the growl were now a deafening, frantic shriek, a terrifying chorus of 1,000 tiny, desperate voices. The wood's walls began to move, its furniture twisting and turning, its shadows flying through the air. The breathing and the growl are a deafening shriek, and I realize the woods are not a place of comfort. It is a place of despair, and the entity is here to feed on me, to consume my fear and my anguish, to make me a part of its eternal, horrifying cycle. The final hour was a terrifying descent into madness. The breathing was a constant, deafening chorus, 1,000 voices all speaking at once, a torrent of despair and anguish that was drowning out my own thoughts. The front door began to slam on its own, the sound a deafening, rhythmic beat that was a countdown to a climax I didn't want to be a part of. The shadows from the house began to coalesce into a single, massive, amorphous shape, a living, breathing entity of pure despair. The growl was a deafening shriek, and I realized the house is not a place of comfort. It is a place of despair, and the entity is here to feed on me, to consume my fear and my anguish, to make me a part of its eternal, horrifying cycle. The creature emerges from the woods, a tall and possibly thin figure with long, spindly limbs. Its face is a terrifying collection of clicking mandibles, and its eyes are a burning, malevolent red. The creature begins to move toward us, its movements a terrifying, silent, and fluid dance. I ran. I didn't stop until I was out of the house, out in the cold. I never looked back. The experience left me with a lasting, profound sense of trauma. The breathing in the shadows, a ghost in my own mind, is a constant companion. I can no longer be in an enclosed space without a profound sense of fear. The house is still there, a massive brick structure that is a silent monument to a living evil. And I know, with a cold, lasting dread, that the despair is still there, waiting for its next visitor, a new person to become a part of the despair. The silence was the first thing to get to us, but the darkness was what let it in. They say it was a citywide blackout, a freak storm that knocked out the power grid for hundreds of miles. People talked about it for weeks, the sheer inconvenience of it all. But I know better. The darkness didn't come from the sky that night. It came from somewhere else entirely, and it brought something with it. It was the kind of darkness that felt heavy, almost tangible, and it wasn't empty at all. My name is Alex, and my wife, Sarah, and I lived in a quiet, suburban home with our young son, Leo. Our life was ordinary, predictable. We had a dog, a mortgage, and a routine. The night it happened was a typical Friday evening. The rain had been coming down for hours, a steady, relentless drumming against the windows, and the wind howled around the eaves of the house. We had a fire going in the fireplace, the warm, flickering light providing a cozy counterpoint to the raging storm outside. Leo, our 4-year-old, was watching a movie on the couch, and Sarah and I were just enjoying the quiet time. It was a perfect, peaceful moment, and then, without warning, the world went out. The television went black, the lights died, and the sound of the furnace fan ceased with a final, dying whimper. For a moment, the only sound was the storm and the fire in the hearth. A true, complete blackout. The initial reaction was one of mild annoyance, mixed with the strange novelty of it all. We laughed, pulled out our camping flashlights, and lit a few candles. Leo thought it was an adventure, a game of hide and seek in the dark. But, as the minutes stretched into an hour, the feeling of a shared experience began to fray at the edges. The candles cast long dancing shadows that seemed to swallow the corners of every room. The storm outside provided a cover for other noises, sounds that weren't quite right. A faint, shuffling sound from the hallway, a dragging noise from the kitchen. We dismissed it, of course. Just the house settling, I said to Sarah, more to reassure myself than her. But the house didn't settle like that. It sounded like something was moving. That's when Leo started. He was sitting on the floor with his little toy cars, but his eyes were fixed on the doorway leading to the dining room. "Daddy," he whispered, "the man is watching me." I followed his gaze, but there was nothing there but dancing shadows. I tried to calm him, telling him it was just the firelight, but he insisted. "No, he's tall. He's standing there." We picked him up, held him close, and told him it was just his imagination. But the seed of terror had been planted. The sounds became more deliberate, more frequent. We were all huddled in the living room, the single flashlight beam, a pathetic shield against the overwhelming black. From the top of the stairs, we heard a deep, resonant sigh, like a lung emptying after holding its breath for far too long. It was a sound that had no business being in our home. I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles turning white, and Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. We heard a low, scraping noise from the kitchen, like someone dragging a heavy box across the floor, but we didn't own anything that sounded like that. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized these were not random noises. They were an oral presence, something moving with intent inside our home. My wife Sarah was staring at the hallway again, her body rigid. I followed her gaze, but saw nothing. "What is it?" I whispered. She just shook her head, unable to speak, but her eyes were wide with a silent terror. "I saw a shadow," she finally managed, "a tall, thin shadow at the end of the hall. It was just standing there." I shone the flashlight, and in its beam, there was nothing but the dusty wall. But the fear in her eyes was real. It had been standing there, just out of our sight, and it had been watching us. We hadn't been alone in the house since the power went out. The final escalation of terror came when the entity began to speak. We were sitting together on the couch, our son held tight between us. The silence broken only by the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the next room and the occasional rumble of thunder. Sarah had just calmed Leo down. I heard a voice whisper my name from the kitchen. "Alex," it said, the sound low, raspy, and terribly close. "Come here." The blood drained from my face. It was my wife's voice. The timbre was perfect, the tone, a soft beckoning. I looked at Sarah, whose head was buried in Leo's hair, her body trembling. Did you say something?" I asked, my voice a hollow whisper. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. "No," she mouthed. The sound came again, this time a little louder, a little more insistent. "Alex?" The voice was coming from the kitchen, just yards away. It wasn't an echo, and it wasn't a trick of the mind. It was a lie, a perfect, sinister imitation, and it wanted me to come closer. The whispering from the kitchen turned into a low, menacing growl, a guttural sound that didn't belong to a human or an animal. I heard the shuffling footsteps, which were now a quick, deliberate pace, moving from the kitchen toward the living room. Sarah pulled Leo tighter against her, burying his head in her shoulder. I aimed the flashlight at the entrance to the living room, my hand shaking so violently the beam bounced like a manic ball of light. I heard my son let out a piercing scream and point toward the corner of the room, behind the couch. "The man, he's here." In the brief, flickering light of a candle that was about to burn out, I saw it. A tall, gaunt figure standing in the doorway, its form a tangle of long, thin limbs, its head slightly too large, with two glowing white eyes that seemed to burn a hole through the darkness. It didn't move like a human. Its limbs seemed to bend at impossible angles, its posture a grotesque parody of a person standing at rest. It was a creature of the blackout, a living absence of light. It took a single, shuffling step into the room, and as it did, the candle flame gave a final gasp and died, plunging us into a darkness so complete it felt like a physical weight in a blind panic, guided only by the sound of my wife's whimpering. I grabbed Leo and Sarah and stumbled toward the back door. We ran out into the pouring rain, barefoot and terrified, without a thought for anything but escape. We got in the car, and I drove 4 hours, not stopping until we saw the first streetlights of a city that had not been affected by the blackout. The power eventually came back on in our town, but we never returned to that house. The experience left us irrevocably changed. I live in a constant state of anxiety, jumping at every flickering light, every unusual sound, every shadow that seems a little too deep. I now know that the darkness isn't just an absence of light. It's a presence, a doorway, and something had walked right through it, right into my home, and I know, with a chilling certainty, that the next blackout won't be an inconvenience. It will be an invitation. The thing about being alone in the dark isn't just the fear of what you can't see. It's the fear of what you can't hear. When the power went out that night, the sudden silence wasn't empty. It felt thick, almost heavy, and I realized with a profound dread that it was listening. It was watching, and that's when it started to play with me. It was a game I didn't know I was in, and it had been toying with me long before I knew it was there. My name is Clara, and I had just moved into a new apartment in a high-rise building. It was a big change from my small, suburban home, and I was still getting used to the strange noises of city life. The constant hum of the air conditioning, the distant sirens, the muffled sounds of my neighbors' lives through the thin walls. My boyfriend was away on a business trip, so I had the place to myself. I'm a rational person. I don't believe in ghosts or monsters. The blackout, when it happened, was a mere inconvenience. It was a normal spring evening, and a sudden, violent storm had rolled in, knocking out the power grid. I was reading a book, a blanket wrapped around me, when everything went dark. I remember the exact moment of silence. The sudden absence of the city's hum was a shock. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and lit a few candles. My apartment was now an island of flickering light in a sea of complete blackness, 40 stories above the ground. It should have felt safe. It should have felt cozy, but it didn't. The first strange event was so subtle I almost dismissed it. I was in the living room, trying to read by candlelight, when I heard a soft thump from the other side of the room. I looked up, and a small framed photo of my boyfriend and me that had been sitting on a shelf was now on the floor. It had been sitting there for weeks, perfectly balanced. I figured it was just the wind from a window I hadn't properly latched, or a slight tremor in the building. I walked over, picked it up, and saw that the glass was cracked. Not shattered, but a single, strange hairline fracture running right through my face in the picture. The feeling of unease was a small, cold knot in my stomach. I carefully placed the photo back on the shelf, thinking nothing more of it. But a few minutes later, I heard a faint, rhythmic scratching sound coming from the kitchen. It was too high up to be a mouse. It was coming from the upper cabinets. I grabbed my phone and shone the flashlight, but there was nothing there. Just the quiet kitchen, eerily lit by my phone's beam. I returned to the living room, and that's when I saw it. Another framed photo, this one, of me alone, was now on the floor. The glass was cracked, just like the other one, but this time, the crack was in the shape of a crooked smile. The paranoia began to gnaw at me. I started hearing what sounded like someone walking quickly in the hallway outside my apartment door. It wasn't a normal walking pace. It was a strange, hurried scuttling, a light, tapping footfall that was too fast to be human. I pressed my ear to the door, listening intently, but all I heard was the muffled, profound silence of the empty hall. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The sounds were no longer external. I began to hear what sounded like my own movements, perfectly mimicked, coming from the next room. A soft, deliberate tap on my shoulder when I knew I was alone. A whisper that sounded exactly like my own voice, saying my name from the kitchen. I began to question my own sanity, but the evidence of the moving photos, of the cracking glass, was undeniable. This was not in my head. Something was in the apartment with me, and it was playing a game. The terror reached a fever pitch when I received a call. My phone buzzed, a jarring sound in the stillness of the apartment. It was my boyfriend's number. My heart leaped with relief. I answered, a frantic, "Hello, are you okay? Where are you?" Ready to spill out? But all I heard was a strange, distorted, and raspy laugh on the other end, followed by a slow, deliberate whisper that sounded exactly like my own voice. "I'm in here with you, Clara." The call cut out. The entity was not just in the apartment. It had access to my life, to my connections, to my very identity. It was not just a prank. It was a malicious, intelligent entity, and it was toying with my mind. I retreated to my bedroom, barricading the door with a chair and a small dresser. I sat there in the flickering candlelight, my phone flashlight a small, trembling beacon, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when I heard it. The sound of my front door, the one I had locked with a deadbolt, slowly creaking open. The footsteps were inside now, too fast, too light, and they were moving with purpose towards my room. The candles in the room began to flicker wildly, the flames dancing and swaying as if a wind was blowing through the apartment. The doorknob to my bedroom began to rattle, a soft, deliberate turning of the handle. Then, the impossibly fast footsteps stopped just outside my door, followed by a loud, single thud against the wood. The sound was not a human fist. It was a solid, percussive impact that made the entire door shudder. The wood began to splinter around the hinges, and I knew with a profound, soul-shattering certainty that whatever was on the other side of that door was not a person. I saw a long, impossibly thin shadow slide under the door, a shape that didn't correspond to a human foot. It was a claw, a black spindly appendage that was searching for an opening dot in a blind panic. I scrambled out of my chair, shoved a window open, and climbed out onto the small fire escape, several stories above the dark city. I stayed there for hours, shaking, a terrified island in the pitch black, until the first lights of the city began to flicker back on, one by one. The building's emergency lights came on, then the power returned to the apartments. Emergency services found me there, a shell-shocked wreck. I never returned to that apartment. The experience left me with an intense, crippling fear of the dark and of being alone. The sound of a sudden thud, a whisper in an empty room, a quick movement in the periphery of my vision, they all bring me back to that night. I know now that some things can only exist in the absence of light, and they are always waiting for the next blackout. The sound of a simple power outage is no longer a sound of inconvenience to me. It's the sound of a key turning in a lock. People romanticize winter storms, the snow falling in soft drifts, the warmth of a fire, the feeling of being cut off from the world in a cozy cabin. We felt that for a few hours. But that night, the storm wasn't just outside the cabin, it was in the cabin. The blackout was a blanket of profound quiet, and the storm was its voice, a howling, malicious voice that was trying to tell us what was happening to our friend. We thought the blizzard was a wall meant to keep us in. We didn't realize it was a disguise meant to let something else get in. My name is Jake, and a few years ago, my friends and Maria, David, and Sarah rented a remote cabin in the mountains for a weekend getaway. It was the kind of place you see in movies: logs, a huge stone fireplace, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto a snow-covered forest. The forecast had called for a blizzard, but we were young and stupid, and we saw it as an adventure, a chance to really disconnect from the world. We had plenty of food, plenty of whiskey, and a roaring fire in the hearth. The mood was jovial, a perfect escape from our chaotic city lives. The snow began to fall as promised, and with it, a low, constant hum of the wind. The world outside began to disappear under a swirling blanket of white. Then, just as the last vestiges of daylight faded, the power went out. The world went silent, and the cabin was plunged into a deeper darkness, lit only by the flickering flames of the fire and the candles we hurried to light. The first hint of a problem wasn't a sound or a sight, but a feeling. We were all laughing and talking, but a tense quiet had fallen over us. That's when we heard it. A frantic, desperate banging on the front door, a heavy, insistent series of impacts that made us all freeze. Who would be out here in this storm? My friend David, being the most pragmatic of our group, grabbed a flashlight and went to the door. We all watched as he unlocked the deadbolt and slowly, cautiously opened it. The wind and snow immediately lashing into the cabin, but there was nothing there. Just a swirling, blinding mass of white. No person, no footprints, nothing. David stood there for a moment, confused, then slammed the door shut, locking it tight. We all tried to rationalize it: a loose shutter, a heavy branch, but the sound had been too deliberate, too much like someone begging to be let in. The first seed of doubt, of fear, had been planted. The weirdness escalated slowly. Our friend Sarah, who had been the most excited about the blizzard, began to act strange. She became withdrawn and quiet, staring out the huge picture window at the swirling snow. When we tried to talk to her, she just muttered, "It's out there. I can see it." We looked, but all we saw was a beautiful, terrifying curtain of white. We tried to laugh it off, saying it was just cabin fever, but she was convinced. She claimed she could see shapes in the blizzard, things that looked vaguely human but moved too fast, too erratically. The other friends dismissed it, but I started to believe her when the sounds began again. We were all gathered around the fireplace, trying to stay warm, when we heard a new sound, a loud, rhythmic scratching on the roof. It was followed by a soft, insistent tapping on the window pane right next to us. The tapping wasn't random, it was a pattern. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps. It was trying to get our attention, and it was doing it with a frightening intelligence. The fear shifted from a general unease to a specific, targeted terror. One of my friends, Maria, let out a blood-curdling scream and pointed at the window. The rest of us turned our heads, and in the space between 2 fierce gusts of snow, We saw it. A large, dark shape, a silhouette of a person standing just outside the window, its form barely visible against the swirling white. It was impossibly tall, its limbs were long and thin, and as we stared at it, we saw its head was tilted at an impossible angle. Its shape was a grotesque parody of a person, a twisted reflection. It didn't have a face, but as Maria screamed, the shape seemed to turn its head directly toward her. The tapping on the window became frantic, a desperate staccato that mirrored her terrified shriek. We all huddled together, paralyzed with fear, as the thing seemed to watch us from the heart of the storm. The scratching on the walls and roof intensified, becoming a frantic, desperate clawing sound, as if a wild animal with razor-sharp talons was trying to break in. The tapping on the windows turned into a solid, insistent banging that shook the glass in its frame. It felt like the cabin was under a physical assault, a siege by something unseen and incredibly powerful. Sarah, who had been muttering all night, stood up and walked to the front door. We all looked at her, terrified. She put her hand on the doorknob, and a strange, wet clicking sound came from her mouth. "Sarah, no," David screamed, but it was too late. She was trying to open the door, trying to let the thing in. We rushed her, pulling her away from the door, but she resisted with an unnatural strength, and she began to scratch at the wood of the door with her fingernails. The sound a horrific echo of the scratching we were hearing from outside. She was no longer Sarah. She was a puppet, and the storm was the puppeteer. We were huddled in a corner of the cabin, holding Sarah down as she thrashed and writhed, scratching at the floor, a manic gleam in her eyes. The scratching and banging outside reached a fever pitch, a deafening assault on the cabin walls and windows. The fire in the hearth began to die down, and the cabin was plunged into a deeper darkness. The sounds from outside suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any noise. We then heard a new sound, the distinct, violent crack of the front door, splintering under an immense unseen force. The door groaned, the wood splintered, and a long, impossibly thin, clawed hand slid through the crack. Its fingers tapped against the air, searching, feeling, probing for a way in. In a last-ditch effort, David grabbed a lit candle and threw it at the clawed hand. The thing hissed, a wet, guttural sound, and withdrew the hand. That was all the chance we needed. We scrambled out the back door, leaving Sarah screaming and scratching at the floor, her eyes wide and unseeing, a prisoner of whatever had gotten into her. We found the snowmobile, started it up, and drove 4 hours through the blizzard, not stopping until we reached a roadside motel with lights. We never returned to that cabin. We were rescued, but not whole. We are forever haunted by the memory of our friend and the sounds that came from the storm. We know now that a blizzard isn't just a weather event. It's a cover, a weapon used by something ancient and cruel to find its way into the world. And we know that somewhere in that cabin, a part of our friend is still trapped, a prisoner of the darkness. Everyone thinks the danger is always outside, something trying to get in. But that night, I learned the real terror is when you're already inside, and you realize you aren't the only one there. The house was locked, the windows were sealed, and I was supposed to be safe. But the first sign, a single footprint in the dust on the hardwood floor, told me I was wrong. It was a footprint that wasn't mine, wasn't the child's, and wasn't wearing shoes. It was a lie in a silent house. My name is Chloe, and I was 17, a seasoned high school babysitter. I'd been doing it since I was 13, and I was good at it. I was responsible, I was great with kids, and I knew how to handle just about any situation that came up. This new job was for a family, the Millers, who had just moved into a large old house on the edge of town. The parents were kind but seemed a little formal, almost nervous, as they walked me through the house. The house itself was beautiful, but old, full of dark wood and long winding hallways. It had a certain scent to it, a musty, old house smell mixed with a hint of something damp. The child, a 6-year-old boy named Ethan, was well behaved and went to bed without a fuss. The parents gave me their number, told me he usually sleeps through the night, and left. I settled onto the big, plush couch in the living room, thinking it would be an easy night of homework and mindless TV. But the moment the door closed behind them, the house seemed to sigh, to settle in, and the silence began to feel heavy. The first hint of a problem was a subtle one, a tiny detail that, on its own, would have meant nothing. I was in the kitchen, making myself a snack, and I noticed it. On the pristine, dark hardwood floor, just a few feet from the back door, was a single footprint. It was a little dusty, a little smudged, but it was there. It was too big to be Ethan's, and I hadn't taken my shoes off since I got there. I stood there, staring at it for a moment, my heart giving a small, uncomfortable lurch. But I was a rational person. It was probably from one of the movers, a smudge I hadn't noticed before. I took a paper towel, knelt down, and wiped it away, feeling a prickle of unease that I immediately dismissed. But as the night wore on, the house started to make its own sounds. The faint rustling from the upstairs hallway, the sound of a door that I was sure I had seen closed, slowly creaking open. I checked on Ethan. He was sleeping soundly, a silent, peaceful lump under his blankets. The rustling stopped the moment I reached the top of the stairs. I chalked it up to the house settling, a draft playing tricks on the old wood. I was just being jumpy. But the paranoia grew when the sounds became more deliberate. I was sitting on the couch, my phone in my hand, when I heard it. The distinct sound of a floorboard creaking upstairs, a sound I knew was too deliberate, too heavy, to be the house settling. It was the sound of a footstep. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering in my chest. I called the Miller's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. I was alone, with no way to contact them, and I was no longer convinced I was alone in the house. I heard a muffled, rhythmic tapping from inside a closet door in the downstairs hallway. It was a soft, insistent tapping, like fingers against wood. My phone's flashlight beam was a pathetic, trembling shield as I aimed it at the closet, and the tapping stopped. The moment I looked away, it started again, but this time from inside the pantry in the kitchen. It was no longer a random sound. It was an oral taunt, a game being played with my fear, and the thing playing it knew exactly what it was doing. The final escalation before the climax was a sound that seemed designed to break my sanity. I was in the living room, trying to stay calm, when I heard it. The faint, distorted music of a music box playing an off-key, warped lullaby. The sound was coming from upstairs, from the direction of Ethan's room. I knew there was no music box in his room. The Millers had shown me the baby monitor, and I knew what his room looked like. There was no music box. The lullaby was a lie, a cruel, childish taunt. My fear was no longer about a harmless prank. It was about a very real, very present threat inside the house, with me and the child. The sounds were no longer just sounds. They were a breadcrumb trail, and the breadcrumbs were leading me to a very specific and very terrifying conclusion. I had to go upstairs and check on him. I had to know if he was safe, if he was even still in his room. The thought of finding him gone was more terrifying than the thought of finding the thing that had been playing with me. I forced myself to go upstairs, my feet heavy on the creaking steps. The music box stopped the moment I reached the landing, leaving me in a terrifying silence. The air was colder up there. I slowly, fearfully, opened the door to Ethan's room, my phone's flashlight a weak beacon in the profound darkness. He was still in his bed, a small lump under the blankets. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a profound, chilling dread. As I got closer, I saw that he was not just asleep. He was lying on top of a pile of his own clothes, and someone had tucked him in with the blanket pulled tight over his face. He was completely still. The air in the room was cold and smelled of damp earth. As I reached out to him, I heard a low, guttural breathing from inside the closet in his room. The breathing was heavy, labored, and it was getting louder. The closet door was slightly ajar. A long pale finger with a dirty fingernail slowly, deliberately, hooked around the edge of the door and began to pull it open. I didn't try to save Ethan. I didn't try to be brave. I just ran. I burst out of the house and drove away, dialing 911 from my car. I was crying, screaming into the phone that there was something in the house, that the child was in danger. The police arrived at the house, but they found nothing out of the ordinary. The child was sleeping soundly in his bed, safe and sound. The Millers called me a few days later, their voices cold and formal, telling me they understood I had an anxiety attack, but my services would no longer be needed. The police, the parents, everyone said it was a panic attack, that I imagined it all. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. I can still hear that breathing from the closet. The memory of that pale, dirty finger pulling open the door, and the knowledge that something was in that house with me, and had been toying with me the entire time, is a weight I will carry forever. I never babysat again. I still jump at every strange sound. And I still wonder what would have happened if I had just stayed in the living room and ignored the music box. What if the thing in the closet didn't want me to run? What if it just wanted me to open the door? People always say, children have imaginary friends. And most of the time, that's exactly what they are, imaginary, a harmless product of a vibrant, creative mind. But the little girl I was watching that night, the one who kept talking to the man in the walls, she wasn't making it up. The man was real, and he wasn't just in the walls. He was in her, too, and he wanted to play with me. My name is Leah, and I was a college student trying to pay for my second semester. I took a high-paying babysitting job for a family, the Hendersons, who lived in a massive, modern mansion on the outskirts of town. The house was all glass, steel, and stark, pristine white walls. The parents were a little cold, a little distant, and their little girl, Lily, who was 7, was eerily quiet and withdrawn. She rarely spoke, and her eyes, though large and a startling shade of green, seemed to hold a vast, empty sadness. Before they left, the parents gave me a strange, specific rule. Don't let Lily go into the basement. Never, for any reason. They didn't elaborate, just said it with a chilling finality that left a cold knot in my stomach. I dismissed it as a parental quirk, a way to keep a curious child safe from a messy cellar. I put Lily to bed, and she was quiet as a mouse, not a sound coming from her room. I settled onto the pristine white couch, and the silence of the house, so perfect and clean, began to feel suffocating. The first hint of a problem was a faint sound from the hallway, a soft, repetitive tapping. I attributed it to the house settling or the plumbing, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. A few minutes later, I went to check on Lily, and I found her out of bed, standing in front of a closet door, tapping on it with her small, pale fingers. The sound was soft, but it was the same rhythm I had heard from the hallway. "Lily," I whispered, "what are you doing?" She turned to me, her face expressionless, and just whispered, "I'm talking to the man." My blood ran cold. "What man?" I asked, my voice a hollow whisper. She just pointed at the closet, a slow, deliberate gesture, and said nothing more. I told her it was just an empty closet, that it was time to go back to sleep. She obeyed me, without a fuss, a compliant, silent doll. But the tapping had been real, and she had been doing it. The weirdness escalated after that. I was in the living room, trying to force myself to focus on my textbook, when Lily emerged from her room. She wasn't walking, but shuffling, her head bowed. She stood in the doorway, staring at me, and began to speak in a strange, low voice. A voice that was gravelly and deep, a voice that was nothing like hers. The words she said were just nonsense, but the tone was menacing, guttural. She pointed a small, delicate finger to a dark corner of the room and said, "He told me to tell you he likes your hair." The chill that ran down my spine was not from a draft. I looked at the corner, but there was nothing there but shadow. I didn't know what to do. I was terrified. I sent her back to bed, and she went without a word, her quietness now more terrifying than her strange new voice. I found myself in a state of profound paranoia, jumping at every shadow, every creak. I went into Lily's room, needing a distraction, and found her sketchbook on her nightstand. I opened it, and my breath hitched in my throat. The drawings were not of princesses or cartoons. They were frantic, scribbled pictures of a tall, thin figure with impossibly long fingers and limbs, a gaunt, shadowy figure that was always in the corner of a room, always watching. The drawings were terrifying, and they all had a single phrase written on them in a childish, crooked hand. "Come play with us." My phone buzzed, and I almost dropped it. It was a text message from the Hendersons' phone number. The message was just a jumble of gibberish, but it was followed by an image. I clicked on it, and the screen illuminated a picture of me, sitting on the couch in the living room, taken from a strange, low angle. It was a picture of me just a few moments ago. The fear shifted from the child's unsettling behavior to a direct, physical threat. Something was in the house with me, and it was watching me. I searched the house in a blind panic. My phone's flashlight beam a useless beacon against the profound darkness of the mansion. The doors were all locked, the windows sealed. I was alone, or so I thought. I returned to Lily's room and found her bed empty. My heart seized in my chest. She was gone. I searched the upstairs, the main floor, the kitchen, calling her name in a frantic, desperate whisper, but there was no answer, just the silence of the house, heavy and oppressive. That's when I heard it, a faint, muffled giggle, a child's sound of glee, coming from the direction of the basement door. The door the parents had told me never to open. The memory of the drawings, of the strange, guttural voice, of the photograph, came crashing back. My instincts told me to run, to get out of the house, but the sound of her laughter, a genuine, joyful sound, was a lure I couldn't resist. I had to go. I had to get her out of there. I descended into the dark, cold basement, the flashlight beam bouncing off concrete walls and dusty storage boxes. The air was thick and smelled of damp earth and rot, and the temperature dropped to a bone-chilling cold. I found Lily standing in the middle of the room, completely still, and she was not alone. Standing just behind her, in the deepest shadow of the room, was a tall, thin silhouette. It was the figure from the drawings. It was swaying back and forth, and it was making the tapping sound, a soft, deliberate tap of a long, spindly finger against the concrete wall. Lily turned to me, a wide, empty smile on her face, and said in a low, hollow voice that wasn't hers, "He likes to play hide-and-seek, but he's not very good at hiding." The figure sways toward me, its limbs unfolding in an unnatural motion, and its form seems to ripple and dissolve in the darkness. A living shadow reaching for me, a malevolent smile of pure, hungry evil spreading across its face in a blind panic. I turned and ran, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. I scrambled up the stairs, slamming and locking the basement door behind me. I called 911, screaming that there was a man in the house, that he was going to get the child. The police arrived, but they found nothing. The house was empty. They eventually found Lily, who was perfectly fine, asleep in her bed, with no memory of what had happened. I never saw the Hendersons again. They paid me for the night's work, but I kept the drawing of the figure. I live with the chilling knowledge that some children aren't just communicating with imaginary friends. They're a doorway, and I now know what kind of things are on the other side of that door, and that they love to play hide-and-seek. The most unnerving part of being a babysitter isn't the darkness or the strange sounds. It's the moment you realize the child isn't just a child. They're a lens, a focus for something you can't see, and you're not there to protect them. You're there to be the distraction, to keep the monster focused on you while it gets closer to what it really wants. And what it wants is the child. My name is Sarah, and I was 16 when I took a babysitting job for a family. The Johnsons, who had just moved into a house that was a century old. It was a beautiful home, with dark wood, dusty books, and a grand, sweeping staircase. But it had a heavy, oppressive silence to it, the kind of silence that feels like it's waiting. The parents, an overworked couple with a distant, haunted look in their eyes, told me about their 2 children, 8-year-old Lily and her 7-year-old brother, Max. The kids are in bed by 8, the mother said, her voice strained. They're quiet. They don't make a fuss. Don't worry about them. Just sit, watch TV, and wait for us to get back. I dismissed the strange tone in her voice as simple exhaustion. She seemed relieved to be leaving, almost desperate. As the door closed behind them, I settled onto the couch, a sense of deep unease settling in with the silence. The first hint of a problem was a sound from the basement, a faint, low humming sound that was rhythmic and mechanical, almost like a music box. I dismissed it, thinking maybe there was an old appliance running down there, but the sound was persistent, and it was too low to be a machine. It was a humming, a lullaby, and it was coming from the darkness beneath my feet. I went to the basement door and found it locked. I peered through a small glass pane in the door, but the basement was pitch black, a void. The humming stopped the moment I got to the door. I convinced myself it was nothing, but when I went back to the living room, I heard another sound. The unmistakable sound of a child's laughter, a soft, joyful giggle, coming from the top of the stairs in the kids' room. But the laughter was too perfect, too clear, too close. I had been told the kids were asleep. My heart began to pound in my chest. I crept to the base of the stairs and peered up into the darkness. There was nothing there, just the silent, winding staircase. I knew I had to check on the kids. I had to know if they were okay. I found Max in his bed, a silent, unmoving lump under the blankets. But Lily was gone. Her bed was empty, the covers thrown off as if in a hurry. My throat went dry. I called her name in a frantic whisper, but there was no answer. I heard the laughter again, a soft, ethereal giggle, this time from the upstairs hallway. At the end of the hall, where a single door, half hidden by shadow, was slightly ajar. I had to follow the sound. I had no other choice. The laughter stopped the moment I reached the door. I slowly pushed it open and peered into the room, a spare, dusty room with a single, small window, and in the corner of the room, standing completely still, was Lily. She was staring out the window, her back to me, her body completely rigid. "Lily," I whispered, "what are you doing? You have to get back to bed." She didn't move. I saw the silhouette of her head was tilted at a strange, unnatural angle. I got closer, and that's when I saw the window. It wasn't just a window, it was a mirror, and in the mirror, I could see her face. Her eyes were not the eyes of a child. They were black and empty, and a profound, unblinking horror. Her mouth was a tight, thin line of pure, malevolent hatred, and she wasn't alone. In the mirror, I saw the reflection of a tall, impossibly thin, shadowy figure standing right behind her, its long, spindly fingers resting on her shoulders. I knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that the laughter hadn't been hers. It had been the monsters. It was a lure, and I had walked right into it. I screamed, a terrified, strangled sound, and I scrambled backward out of the room. I ran down the stairs, but as I reached the bottom, I saw them. Max and Lily. They were both standing there, at the base of the stairs, their bodies rigid, their heads tilted at that same unnatural angle. Their eyes were black, and a slow, deliberate tapping sound, like a finger against wood, was coming from inside the pockets of Max's pajamas. They started walking toward me, a slow, shuffling gait, their limbs moving in a jerky, puppet-like fashion. I tried to scream, but my voice had failed me. I was trapped, a single person against two things that were no longer children, in a house that was no longer a home. I ran into the kitchen, slamming the door behind me, but I knew it was useless. I looked out the kitchen window, into the cold, dark night, and I saw a new reflection, standing just behind me. A tall, shadowy figure with black, empty eyes was looking back at me, a wide, malevolent grin on its face. The humming began again, a low, guttural, rhythmic sound from all around me. It wasn't a lullaby, it was a death song. The humming grew louder, a profound, deafening noise that seemed to fill the very air in the room, and I saw the figure in the window move toward me, its limbs unfolding in an unnatural, horrific motion. The police found me huddled in the corner of the kitchen, a terrified, sobbing wreck, but they found nothing else. The house was empty. The children were found safe and sound, in a neighbor's house, where they had run for help after they had woken up to a strange noise. The Johnsons never hired me again. I quit babysitting, and I never went back to that house. The memory of the children's black eyes, the tapping sound, and the humming will stay with me forever. I know now that some houses are not just homes. They are traps. And some children aren't just children. They're a disguise, and you're not there to protect them. You're there to be the bait. The sound of a child's laughter is no longer a sound of joy to me. It's the sound of a monster getting closer. The old man's words still echo in my head, a low, gravelly whisper that was meant to be a final warning. You don't just talk about them. You don't just write about them. You don't just look for them. Because if you do, they will find you. I thought it was a story, a superstition from a remote culture, the colorful mythology of a forgotten land. I was wrong. It wasn't a story at all. It was a promise, a terrifying, irrevocable promise. My name is Liam, and I'm a or at least, I was. My show focused on cryptids and folklore, the unexplained stories that haunt the fringes of human history. I was a professional skeptic, a man who saw the world in facts and evidence, and who believed that every myth had a rational explanation if you just looked hard enough. The Skinwalker legend was a holy grail for me, a story that was so terrifying, so deeply embedded in a culture, that it felt like the ultimate test of my skepticism. I made a trip to a remote part of the Navajo Nation, a vast, silent, and humbling land of deep red canyons and endless sky. I had arranged to interview an elder who had a reputation for knowing the old stories. A man named Thomas who lived in a small, isolated hogan far from any paved road. The interview was tense. Thomas was reluctant. His eyes, dark and ancient, seemed to see right through me. He gave me the warnings, not with anger, but with a profound, weary sadness. I recorded the interview, feeling a thrill of triumph. I had my story, my proof of concept. I was a city guy, a man of science, and I was immune to superstition. My arrogance was my greatest asset. It was also a death sentence. The night after the interview, I got lost. The dirt roads, which had seemed so clear in the daylight, became a confusing, winding labyrinth of red clay and sagebrush in the absolute darkness. My GPS, my infallible beacon of modern knowledge, failed, and my phone lost its signal, leaving me cut off and alone. The stars were brilliant, a cold, indifferent tapestry above, but the land below was a black, empty void. That's when the sounds began. At first, they were just part of the night. The distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of a tumbleweed. But then came the other sounds. Faint whistles from the canyons, a series of quick clicks and chitters that seemed to echo and reverberate in the stillness. I pulled over, my heart beginning to pound in my chest, telling myself it was nothing, just a trick of the wind. I listened, and the moment I stopped, all the sounds stopped, too. The silence was more terrifying than the sounds. It felt expectant. My paranoia grew when I saw something in my rearview mirror. It was a figure on a far-off hill, a silhouette that looked like a coyote, but it was standing on two legs, perfectly still, just watching my car. My blood ran cold. It was too far away to be certain, but the shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin. When I blinked, it was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a branch, a shadow. But the air in the car had become heavy, oppressive. The car's engine began to sputter, the headlights flickering and dying with a soft, electrical hiss. I was forced to pull over, the car coasting to a silent stop in a deep arroyo, surrounded by rocky outcrops and black nothingness. I got out, grabbing a flashlight, a shaky, feeble beacon against the overwhelming dark. I lifted the hood and peered in, trying to find a broken wire, a loose connection. I was a man of logic. There was a rational explanation. But as I leaned into the engine bay, I heard it. A low, mocking laugh from the darkness. It wasn't a human laugh. It was a series of clicks and whistles that formed the sound of a laugh. It was inhuman, malicious, and it was close. I scrambled back into the car, locking the doors, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was no longer a skeptical journalist. I was a terrified animal caught in a trap. A handprint appeared on my dusty window, a single, perfect human handprint, but with impossibly long, gnarled fingers. It was a sign, a mark, a declaration. I heard a voice from outside, a guttural wet sound, whispering the old man's warning, "They will find you." The voice was a low, resonant drone that seemed to vibrate through the metal of the car. It wasn't Thomas's voice, not exactly. It was a parody of it, a hollow, malevolent imitation that contained none of the old man's weary wisdom, only a profound, ancient hatred. It was no longer a game. It was a consequence. My arrogance had not made me immune. It had made me a target. I had disrespected their rules, their land, and their stories. And now I was going to pay the price. I was trapped, a helpless animal, in a metal cage. The creature began to circle the car. Its footsteps a horrifying mixture of human and animal sounds, a slow, shambling rhythm that was punctuated by the sharp snap of its long, clawed feet against the rocks. I saw it now, not just a shape, but a thing. It was impossibly tall, thin, its body a grotesque mockery of a man, covered in matted, dark fur. Its eyes were a sickly sulphurous yellow that glowed in the darkness, two malevolent orbs that burned with a cold, hungry light. It began to scratch at the window, its long, sharp talons making a horrifying sound against the glass, a sound of pure vengeance. It then began to mimic the voice of the old man again, but the words were twisted, full of a profound hatred. "You came looking for a story, and you found one? A final one." The creature pressed its face against the glass, and I saw that its face was a distorted, inhuman mask, a parody of a man, with a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth and a long wet tongue that slithered from its lips. It was a monster, born of the darkness, and it was hunting me. I don't know how long I was trapped there. An eternity, a few minutes, I have no idea. The headlights of a passing vehicle, a tribal ranger on his patrol. A miracle of a man scared the creature away with a low, frustrated hiss. He found me the next morning, a shell-shocked wreck. He didn't ask questions. He just gave me a long, knowing look and drove me back to civilization. I abandoned my podcast, my life's work, my arrogance and my skepticism shattered into a million pieces. The warnings were not folklore. They were sacred truths, rules I had arrogantly broken. The shame of my disrespect and the terror of what I saw are a permanent scar, a weight on my soul. I live with the knowledge that I am forever on its radar. The sound of a simple laugh or a distant whistle is now enough to send me into a panic. I know it's always listening, always watching, and it will eventually find me. The woods are a scary place, but they're scarier when you're not sure if the people you went in with are the same people you're coming out with. The sound of our friend's voice calling for help was what drew us into the deep canyons. It was a perfect, agonizing sound of a man in need. The sound of his voice mocking us from the darkness was what made us realize we were now being hunted. We were not looking for a friend who was lost. We were being lured to a place where he had been found and replaced by a predator that was wearing his skin. My name is Mike, and for years, my friends Sarah, Dave, and Emily and I were inseparable. We were a tight-knit group of experienced hikers and campers. Our friendship forged over countless miles of trails and nights spent under the stars. We had planned a long weekend trip to a remote canyon system in the American Southwest. A beautiful but isolated place known for its challenging terrain and breathtaking vistas. We set up camp in a secluded alcove, and the initial mood was one of camaraderie and adventure. We were all aware of the local folklore, the hushed warnings about the things that walk at night, but we were modern, city-dwelling friends who dismissed them as just stories. We were a rational group, and we had our own kind of magic, friendship, trust, and a deep respect for the wilderness. We thought we were a group of 4. We were about to find out we were a group of 3, with a hunter wearing the skin of our lost friend. The first strange event was the silence. Dave, the most experienced hiker among us, had gone off to scout a potential trail for about an hour. He was an expert, and we weren't worried. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in deep reds and oranges, Dave still hadn't returned. An hour became 2, and our confident chatter gave way to a strained, uneasy quiet. As night fell, a genuine, cold panic began to set in. We knew the canyons could be treacherous, but Dave was always careful. He was an expert. As the darkness became absolute, the silence was broken by a sound that made our blood run cold. A faint voice, calling from the canyons. A sound that was unmistakably Dave's voice, calling for help. It was too far away to be real, but it was a perfect, heartbreaking mimicry, and it was enough to compel us to leave the safety of our camp and go looking for him. Our paranoia grew with every step we took. We were hiking deeper into the canyon, our flashlights dancing on the rocky walls, following the voice. But as we got closer, the voice began to change. The desperate calls for help became interspersed with strange, guttural whistles and clicks. The voice started to sound distorted, like a broken record, a perfect, agonizing mimicry of a man in deep distress, but with an unnatural, chilling undercurrent. We were no longer following a lost friend. We were following a lure. The fear became physical when we found Dave's backpack and gear. It was on a flat, pristine ledge, his water bottle full, his phone still in the pocket of his pack. It looked as if he had just dropped it and walked away. There were no signs of a struggle, no scuffs on the ground, nothing. The scene was one of profound, intentional stillness. It was too perfect. This was the moment we all realized something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. We weren't looking for our friend. We were looking for his ghost. The final escalation of terror came when the voice returned, but this time, it was a horrifying parody of all our voices. not just Dave's. We were now hearing a distorted, high-pitched scream that was Sarah's, a desperate cry that was Emily's, and a panicked call that was my own. We realized the calls had been a trap, a way to get us away from the safety of our camp and into the vast, empty canyons. We turned to go back, our hearts pounding, but we saw a figure in the darkness, a silhouette of a man, but it wasn't walking. It was scuttling, its body low to the ground. It had Dave's exact height and build, but it was moving with an unnatural, jarring speed, its long, spindly limbs carrying it with a grotesque, broken grace. It was a caricature of our friend, a horrifying mockery of a human being. It was the moment we knew with a chilling certainty that the entity was not just in the canyons. It was wearing our friend. The remaining 3 of us were huddled together, terrified, as we made our way back to camp. The distorted voices of all our friends, including a terrifying imitation of our own voices, were coming from the darkness surrounding us. The clicks and whistles were all around us, a symphony of malicious joy. We were under attack, and the true terror was not the monster in the canyons, but the possibility that it was now among us. We got back to our camp, and Emily, in a blind panic, turned on Sarah. "You've been so quiet," she screamed, her voice shaking. "You haven't said a word since we left. It's you, isn't it? You're a mimic." Sarah denied it, her face a mask of terror, but the trust was gone. The friendship, the foundation of our group, had been shattered. They turned on each other, a psychological breakdown in the face of the unknown, and as they were tearing each other apart, I saw it, a tall, thin silhouette standing at the edge of our campsite, a figure with Dave's exact height and build, but its head was tilted at a horrifying, unnatural angle, and it was making a low, clicking sound. It was watching us fall apart, and it was enjoying every second of it. In a moment of pure, animalistic terror, I abandoned my friends and my camp, running for my life in a different direction. I ran for hours, not looking back, the sounds of my friends' screams and the clicking of the creature echoing behind me. I made it out of the canyons, a shattered wreck of a man. I never saw my friends again. I don't know who made it and who didn't. The mystery is left unsolved, a permanent scar on my soul. I now live with the constant, crippling paranoia that the world is full of mimics, and that the person you're talking to, the person you love, might not be who they seem. The sound of a friend's voice is no longer a comfort to me. It's a potential lie, and I can still hear the clicks and whistles of the thing that found our friend, and then found us. I was a hunter. I knew the woods, the animals, and the silent language of the hunt. I was a man of routine and confidence, a man who saw the world as a predictable system of predator and prey. But that night, the rules changed. The hunter became the hunted, and the thing that was stalking me didn't just know the woods, it knew me. It knew my name, it knew my past, and it was using it to break me down, one whispered lie at a time. The real horror wasn't in the attack. It was in the realization that the thing hunting me knew the things I had tried so hard to forget. My name is John, and for the last 30 years, I've spent a week alone in my remote hunting cabin in a dense, forested area. It's a simple, rustic place, a sanctuary from the noise of the modern world. I'm a man who trusts his instincts, his knowledge of the wilderness, and the silence of the woods. It's a silent language I've learned to read over a lifetime of hunting. The snap of a twig, the distant call of a bird, the rustle of leaves, they all tell a story. This particular trip was no different. I was out on a deer stand one afternoon, the sun, a warm blanket on my shoulders, when I saw it. It was a figure in the distance, a tall, thin silhouette of a man, but it wasn't walking. It was shuffling, a bizarre loping gait that carried it across the forest floor with impossible speed. It was gone in a moment, I dismissed it as a hallucination, a trick of the light, a man in a bear suit. But a cold knot of unease had formed in my stomach. The woods were no longer just a predictable system of predator and prey. Something else was in the equation. The weirdness escalated when I returned to my cabin. My hunting gear, which I had arranged with a meticulous, lifelong precision, had been moved. Not stolen, but rearranged. My rifle was leaning against the wrong wall. My backpack was on the floor instead of on its hook, and my boots, which I had left by the door, were now facing the fireplace. It was a deliberate, subtle violation of my space, a message that my sanctuary had been breached. The silence of the woods was no longer comforting. It was a profound, watchful stillness, a silence that felt like a threat. My paranoia grew when I started hearing noises outside the cabin at night, a scratching on the wooden walls, a sound that was too rhythmic, too deliberate to be an animal, a low, guttural sigh that seemed to come from just outside my window. I sat up in my bed, my shotgun by my side, and listened. The moment I grabbed the shotgun, the sounds stopped. It was playing a game with me, a predator toying with its prey. The fear became personal when the sounds turned into a voice. It was a clear, unmistakable voice from my past, a ghost that had haunted me for years. It was the voice of my deceased wife, Mary, calling my name from the darkness outside the cabin. "John, come home, ... The voice was perfect, a horrifyingly accurate mimicry of her gentle tone, her slight, sweet lilt. I sat there, paralyzed, my breath a ragged gasp. The voice began to whisper things only Mary and I would know. Private jokes, long-forgotten memories, things I had never told anyone. Remember that night, John, the rain. Remember the dance. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a mimicry of a voice. It was an invasion of my mind, a violation of my most sacred memories. The entity was not just in the woods. It was in my head, a malicious parasite feasting on my past. The final escalation of terror came when the voices from my past intensified. I was a man under siege, a mental assault designed to break me down. I heard my father's disappointed voice. "You were never good enough." "Son," I heard my mother's frantic pleas. "John, please, just come home." The whispering became a chorus of guilt and regret, a psychological assault that tore at my sanity. The scratching and banging on the cabin intensified, becoming a frantic, desperate attack on the walls and door, as if something was trying to break its way in. The cabin was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cage. I was being hunted by a thing that knew me better than I knew myself, a monster that had taken the form of my past, and it was relentless. I was huddled in my cabin, a man broken by a psychological siege, my hands shaking, my mind a storm of fear and confusion. The whispering from outside stopped. The scratching and banging stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. I then heard a new sound, a sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps walking on two legs. But the gate was wrong, too low to the ground. The footsteps stopped right outside my cabin door. I saw a long, impossibly thin shadow slide under the door. It was a silhouette of a hand, a human hand, but with impossibly long, gnarled fingers. The shadow moved, and a voice, a grotesque parody of my own voice, whispered from outside the door, "Let me in, John. Let me come home." The terror was a physical force, a profound, bone-deep dread that paralyzed me. The entity was not just outside. It was now using my own voice, my own memories, and my own identity against me. It was a perfect mimicry, a final, horrifying taunt. I don't know how I found this strength. I grabbed my rifle, and with a final, primal scream of terror, I shot through the door, over and over again, until the gun was empty. I didn't know if I hit anything. I just kept shooting, a desperate attempt to create a barrier of noise and violence between me and the thing on the other side of the door. I was found the next morning, a shell-shocked wreck by a hunting buddy who had come to check on me. The police found nothing, but the door was riddled with bullet holes. The story I gave was a pathetic half-truth about a bear. I never hunted again. I sold the cabin. I now live with the constant, crippling paranoia that the world is full of whispers from the past, and that the thing that was stalking me is still out there, waiting. The sound of a simple whisper is no longer a comfort to me. It's a potential lie, and I know that the hunter can never truly escape the hunted.